What's up, plant lovers? Devin is here, and today we're going to be talking about MONSTERA deliciosa. This plant, I've been growing it for the last 3 years. It has just really sort of filled out the corner where it has been growing. It has overgrown this pot, and so in this video, I'm going to do a recap on how to grow large, luscious MONSTERA deliciosas, but then I'm also going to show you guys how to get them replanted into the next size container, as well as installing a support structure such as a moss pole or a wooden plank, which will allow your MONSTERA to climb, and as it climbs, creates larger leaves. Now, I started growing this plant 3 years ago, right at the very beginning of 2020. And you can see over the last three and a half years, this guy went from being a small little 6-inch pot to this enormous 6-foot plant. And we love MONSTERA deliciosa because they are such rapid growers and they produce these wonderful, lovely leaves. If you are growing MONSTERA deliciosa for the first time and you're looking for a little bit of additional information on how to grow them, I'm going to do a quick recap on what the best practices are for your MONSTERA. First and foremost, these plants, they like to have an appropriate sized container. Now, MONSTERA deliciosa is a member of the Araceae family, the aroid family, and other aroids like anthuriums, many philodendrons, tend to like containers that are relatively small. However, MONSTERA deliciosas prefer to have enough soil to actually grow into. So that's a big distinction. If you're growing your MONSTERA in a container that is just too small and it's drying out too quickly, the leaves are wilting, those are good signs that it's probably appropriate for you to upsize to the next size container. To really determine that, simply pull your plant out of the pot, see if it's root bound. If you see the roots are starting to circle their ways around the bottom of the container, that means it's root bound and that means it's due for potting up to the next size container. Now, when we're potting up, we always want to make sure that we're using nice, fresh potting mix. I'm just going to be using some of this classic potting mix in this yellow bag that you can find at any box store or garden center. Because MONSTERAs are such vigorous growers, they really don't need any sort of special treatment with regards to the type of soil. I do recommend feeding them regularly. Giving them some sort of water-soluble fertilizer once a month is great. I use something called Roberta's Bounty. It's my family's blend, and I use it on pretty much all my houseplants, but I also use it on my outdoor garden plants as well. It's pretty nice. And also, if you are storing your aerial roots in a jar, like I do, you can check this video up right here to see a few different options on what you can do with these aerial roots that emanate from the stems that are growing. My particular preference has been to use them in a jar filled with water, and what I actually do is I provide a little bit of fertilizer in this water here, and that actually also provides an extra mechanism for them to be fed, which has been really great. The next thing you want to consider is lighting, of course. Now, MONSTERA do relatively well in a lower light situation. You can see I had this plant growing in a corner with just one single LED floodlight. It wasn't even a grow light. It was on a 12-hour timer, and it was doing absolutely fantastic. However, if you are struggling to get your MONSTERA to grow by providing it with a lot of nice brightness, they will grow exponentially more quickly. For the very first year I had this growing, I had it outside in the summertime in the full baking sun, and that allowed it to really just create about 2 feet of growth in that very first summer. And then from there, it just never looked back. It's just continued to grow very well. The next thing that I like to do to really encourage large leaf formation is I always like to remove smaller leaves. Now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 leaves total on my plant. That's not because that's all the plant can manage. It's because I actively remove leaves. I will actively remove smaller leaves, and when you remove smaller leaves, that allows your plant to create new, larger leaves. But that's totally a preference. Some gardeners like to have nice bushy plants. I prefer to have a little bit more of a sculptural appeal from my MONSTERA, and for me that involves removing leaves to have kind of a set number of leaves, and by having a set number of leaves, that means every successive leaf that comes about on my plant is probably going to be a little bit bigger than the previous one, have a little bit better fenestration, which are these cool slits and holes, and that is exactly what I'm looking for out of my MONSTERA. It's up to you. And then the final and most important facet is that in nature, these plants are either scramblers, meaning they're growing on the sides of hills and they're kind of just like finding new places down that soil to root into and continue to grow, or they're climbing up trees, up hillsides, all sorts of things. It's really important to note because in our homes, it's almost impossible to provide that sort of scrambling effect. So that means we really need to give them something to climb up. Without providing it support to climb up, they really just won't take off in growth. So in this video, I'm gonna show you how to install some sort of support structure so that you can get your Monstera climbing up, growing faster, producing these huge beloved leaves from our Monsteras. All right, so let's get into it. All right, so if you already have yours climbing up something with some sort of support structure, the first thing we need to do is absolutely remove it from the support. But before that, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna take these roots out of the jar because as I'm actually going to be repotting this into a new pot, I'm actually gonna bury these roots into the soil of this new container that it'll be growing into. So look at these gorgeous roots that have been growing. By storing those aerial roots in water, you're actually allowing them to create new types of roots that can then easily be planted in soil later on. So this is a nice placeholder method until you have the opportunity to plant these into the soil. So you definitely want to kind of separate them a little bit because they are definitely all nice and bound together. The next thing we're going to do, we're going to be carefully removing any sort of support that may be provided to your Monstera. So that means that removing any sort of tape or string. All right, easy as that. Now we want to just carefully place this down. Now here you can see I have some of these aerial roots that are actually growing into this moss pole. So I'm just going to cut them because I cannot actually remove them. So that's one. I'm going to cut this guy just like that. I have another one right here. And I have two more right here. All right. All right. So if you have been using moss poles, one of the reasons we utilize moss poles is the moss provides the Monstera something to actually bore those aerial roots into. However, I found that over time that the moss poles are not necessarily the very best thing to provide support. So I'm actually going to show you guys how to use just a single plank of wood as opposed to a moss pole. So next step is to remove the moss pole. And then from here, we're going to take it out of this container. So because this guy is just so big, I'm just going to slowly tease it out. There we go. Now sometimes you may need to use like a serrated knife around the edge of the container to get those edge roots a little bit loose. All right. And as you can see, this is one big honking plant. So the next thing we need to do is just tease these roots a little bit, removing as much of that soil as we possibly can. Now this is a big ordeal, so doing this once every 2 years is about all that you really need to do. Okay? Now I'm just going to leave it just like that. I think that is just enough. You can see any deeper I would go might start to damage more root material than I really want to. So as you can see, the container that I've chosen is simply just about 1 inch in diameter, thicker on each side. So that's really all that you need to do. And if you are using terracotta or ceramic trays, do remember to always put little furniture thingies on the bottom of these, because if you do have this on like a wooden floor or a tile floor or anywhere, there is always going to be moisture that emanates from the bottom of these, so you can definitely leave irreparable marks on wooden floors or carpets, things like that. So adding a little bit of extra space, just this little sliver, is going to create airflow that will stop any mold from forming. Okay, so put this underneath here, and then we'll just start by backfilling this container in a little bit. Looks about right. And then we're going to take our Monstera and position it towards the front of this container. Okay, just like that. Now, if you do have any roots like this that we're growing in the container, or any of those aerial roots that you really want to bury, this is the time to get them in the pot. Just kind of stuff them in there a little bit. And then I need to use something to prop this guy up. I don't want him to really go down too far. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add in this plank, this wooden plank. Now, if you do want to use a moss pole, this is when you add in the moss pole. But like I was mentioning, I found that using these wooden planks, you know, I'm just going to be using a 2x4 stud that I had, you know, in my garage. And these are going to be absolutely perfect. They provide the structure. Yes, the aerial roots won't bore into that and grow into them, but it doesn't really matter. I found that using the moss poles are great if you can keep that moss moist, but that's impossible. No one can be consistently keeping those moss poles moist. So why not just use something cheaper, more readily available in the form of wood planks that you buy at your hardware stores. So now is when we are going to position this guy in here. And we really want to get this down to the bottom of the container as best as possible. Just like that, all right? All right, now is when I really want like 5 hands. Okay, so I'm gonna keep this guy balanced while I add in more soil. And obviously this is why I'm using the tarp, because this is not a clean job to be doing by any means. And it's super important to really stuff the soil in behind this plank so that it is nice and firm. I want to use our fingers around the edges to make sure that there's no air pockets. We don't want air pockets, especially around those roots, because that can cause them to dry out. All right, I think we finally got the soil in there. Let's take a look. Now the next thing, I'll show you guys how to get those Monstera supported by that big wood plank. All right, before we go any further, we want to give it a nice drink of water. Yes, for the plant, but also it'll help stabilize this plank from moving around in a wet soil medium. So give it a really nice, good drink. Pat down the soil around that wooden pole a little bit better. So the next part that we need to do is figure out how we want our Monstera stems to be situated. This can take a little bit of playing around. And I think for me, I'm gonna have this guy kind of wrap around the back like this. And that's gonna allow the majority of the foliage to sit forward like this. And then this guy over here, I'll situate like this. And I think this creates a pretty nice appeal from this plant, don't you think? Then we're gonna use what's called floral tape. You can find a link in the description below. This is what we're gonna use to actually adhere the stems to our planks or our moss poles. Previously, I used to use string, but I found that as our plants get bigger and heavier, the stems will actually get cut by the string. So now using this nice floral tape is really much preferred because it has no chance that it will ever bore into those stems. And it's really easy to use. All right. So once you have your section, take a nice chunk of this floral tape. You can just tear it right off. Get your stem situated. And then from here, you see this is a big, nice a big nice node right here. This will be a great point to actually adhere it to. So I'm going to take my floral tape, I'm going to wrap it around the stem all the way. And then from there, I will wrap it around the wooden plank. And then simply tie a knot with the tape. It's called floral tape, but it's not actually like super sticky. It's just like, just sticky enough. Okay? And now it's nice and adhered to our plank. And of course, as you're doing it, it's not going to stay exactly in the spot that you were intending it, so you might have to sort of yank it up a little bit, do some more twisting, and then I'll do the same thing here. We wrap it all the way around that stem first, just like that. Bring it to where we want, and then go ahead and wrap it around that wood plank. Super easy. So while doing the first stem, the plant told me that it wanted its face to be that way instead of that way, and that's perfectly all right. Let your plant dictate where it wants the front to be. That doesn't mean, just because the plank isn't facing that direction, it doesn't matter. Now I have the second stem up, and I think something like this should be good. So I'll do the same process. I'll wrap all the way around the stem. And then around the plank. And you can allow as much slack or as little slack as you really want with this floral tape. That's why it's so nice and convenient and easy to use. Well, what do you guys think? I think it looks pretty darn good. I'm quite pleased. It's definitely holding a much bigger space with this larger pot and this wooden plank. And now the Monstera is encouraged to continue to grow. So I hope with this video you figured out some tips and tricks on how to get your Monsteras to grow bigger, faster, producing these large, beautiful leaves, as well as how to pot your Monstera to the next size container using some sort of support structure like a wooden plank, like a moss pole, or whatever you may have decided to use. If you do still have any further questions, make sure to leave them in the comment section below. But also consider subscribing to our page, liking this video if you did enjoy this content. We are bringing new plant-related content every single week. So please stay with us as we all become better lovers of Mother Nature together. Anyways, thank you guys for joining me here on Plant Vibrations. I'll catch you soon. Ciao.